The first thing I remember was the silence after the crash. Not the kind of silence that comforts, but the kind that feels alive, heavy, and waiting to devour you whole. The sea roared in the distance, yet everything around me seemed muffled, as if the world had stopped breathing. Pieces of the small aircraft floated on the surface of the ocean, shimmering beneath the merciless sun. I dragged myself onto a strip of sand, gasping, my throat burning with salt water and fear. The waves lapped at my feet, pulling at the remnants of my clothes. My hands shook as I looked around, dazed and broken, until I saw her. She was lying a few feet away, face down, her hair tangled with seaweed and sand. I stumbled toward her, heart pounding with the desperate hope that she was still alive. When I turned her over, she coughed violently, choking out seawater before gasping for air. Relief tore through me like lightning. Her eyes opened slowly, hazel with flecks of green, frightened yet fierce. That moment felt unreal, like two souls reborn from disaster. I didn't know her name then. I didn't know we were about to share something that would change both our lives forever. Speech balloon. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in the power of the human heart. Speech balloon. Her name was Aria. She was a travel photographer, on her way to shoot a documentary about forgotten islands of the Pacific. I was a marine engineer, escorting cargo to a research station. When the storm hit, there were only 6 of us on board the small charter plane. Now, only 2 remained. The island we'd crashed near was barely visible on any map, a speck of land wrapped in coral and silence. The first few days were about survival. We found shelter in a cave by the cliffs, gathered coconuts and rainwater, and tried to signal any passing ships. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, we began to realize something terrifying: no one was coming. The world had moved on. Rescue planes might have searched, but storms shift coordinates, debris sinks, and people forget. At first, we barely spoke. She stayed cautious, alert, keeping to herself. I could tell she was terrified but trying hard not to show it. Every time I caught her staring at the horizon, I could see the weight of what we'd lost: family, plans, dreams, all fading in that endless blue. I tried to build something resembling normalcy: a small hut from bamboo and palm leaves, a fishing trap, a fire pit. She helped quietly, her hands blistered and raw, her spirit holding onto some fragile thread of hope. But it wasn't just survival we were fighting for, it was the battle to stay human. Loneliness crept in like the tide. Nights were the hardest. The wind would wail through the trees like voices of the drowned, and every sound felt like a ghost of the world we once knew. Sometimes, I'd catch her crying softly when she thought I was asleep. She'd whisper names, maybe of people she loved, maybe of the life she'd lost. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, but what right did I have to promise anything in a place where even time seemed broken? Then, one morning, everything changed. We had been out collecting wood near the western cliffs when I slipped on wet rock and tumbled down, slicing my leg open on coral. The pain was blinding. Blood mixed with seawater, and I could barely stand. Before I could even cry out, she was there, her arms around me, her voice trembling but firm. She dragged me back to the hut, tore her own shirt to make bandages, and cleaned the wound with the care of someone who refused to lose another soul. That night, as I lay half-conscious, I felt her hand holding mine. It wasn't just comfort, it was connection. 2 hearts clinging to the only thing that still made sense in a world that didn't: each other. From that night onward, something softened between us. She began to smile again, faintly at first. She'd hum songs while we worked, or laugh at my terrible attempts to cook. She'd tease me for being too serious, calling me her storm face. And I began to see her differently. Not just as a survivor, but as someone who made even the silence of the island feel alive. Days turned to months. We learned to live. We built a garden from seeds that washed ashore. We caught rainwater in carved bamboo pipes. We even gave names to places: the Whispering Cliff, where the wind sang through the rocks; the Mirror Shore, where the water reflected the sky so perfectly it felt like walking on clouds. We stopped counting days. The island was no longer a prison, it was becoming our home. But still, there were moments when reality would crash through our fragile peace. A distant thunderstorm would bring back the memory of the crash. A piece of floating debris would remind us that the world still existed beyond this place. And every now and then, I'd find Arya standing on the beach at sunset, staring at the horizon with tears she tried to hide. One evening, after a long day of gathering food, she sat beside me by the fire. The glow painted her skin in gold, and her hair danced in the wind. She looked at me for a long time, her eyes reflecting the flames, and then she said quietly, "Do you ever think we were meant to survive?" Her question hung in the air like smoke. I didn't know how to answer. Maybe fate had played its cruel trick, or maybe this island was our second chance, a chance to learn what truly mattered. She looked away, hugging her knees, and whispered, "I used to think I knew what I wanted in life: fame, freedom, love on my own terms. But now, I just want peace." Then, after a long silence, she turned back to me, her voice trembling but certain, "I'm just a woman, and you're what I want." Her words hit me harder than the waves ever could. There was no hesitation, no pretense, just truth. In that moment, surrounded by the sound of the sea and the crackle of fire, we weren't castaways anymore. We were two hearts that had found each other in the ruins of everything else. We didn't rush into anything. Love, on that island, wasn't about grand gestures or promises, it was about small things. The way she'd wake me at dawn with fresh fruit. The way I'd carve wooden trinkets for her from driftwood. The way our hands would brush and linger, wordlessly saying what we couldn't put into words. There was something pure about it, something that belonged only to us. But peace never lasts forever. It was nearly a year after the crash when we heard the sound, a low hum in the distance. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then she heard it too, a plane. We ran to the shore, waving branches, lighting our emergency fire. The smoke rose high, curling into the sky like a desperate prayer. And then, the plane circled. It saw us. We fell to our knees, laughing, crying, unable to believe it. Rescue had finally come. The night before the rescue team arrived, neither of us slept. We sat by the fire, silent, each lost in our own thoughts. The island that had once felt like our world was about to become a memory. I looked at her, and for the first time, she seemed afraid. Not of dying, but of leaving. She whispered, "When they take us back, will we still be us?" I didn't have an answer. The next morning, a boat arrived. The rescuers called out, their voices breaking the silence that had ruled our lives for so long. Arya stood at the edge of the shore, her hand in mine. As we stepped onto the boat, she looked back at the island, the cliffs, the trees, the home we had built, and whispered, "Goodbye." Back in civilization, everything felt strange. The noise, the lights, the rush of people, it all felt wrong. We were heroes, survivors, faces on magazine covers. But fame is a shallow reflection of what truly matters. For a while, we tried to hold on to what we had. We met in cities, tried to plan a life together. But the world pulled at us in different directions. Her career took off again. Mine demanded travel. Slowly, distance began to grow, not from lack of love, but from the weight of reality. Months passed, then years. One evening, as I was walking home through the rain, I got a message from her. It was just a photo of the island, taken from above. And her words beneath it, "I still dream of it sometimes. Of you. Of peace." I stared at that message for a long time, the rain blending with tears I didn't want to admit were falling. Maybe some stories aren't meant to last forever in the world's eyes. Maybe they just live on inside us, in the quiet, in the longing, in the part of our hearts that still remembers what it was like to be truly seen, truly loved, without walls or expectations. Because the truth is, that island wasn't just where we survived, it was where we learned what it means to be alive. Waterwave Broken Heart, if this story touched your heart, please don't leave without liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who believes in the power of love and fate. Broken Heart Waterwave. Speech balloon, and tell me in the comments, if you were stranded with someone and the world disappeared, what do you think you'd discover about yourself? Speech balloon. As I sit here now, years later, watching the sunset from my apartment balcony, I sometimes hear the whisper of waves in my mind, the same rhythm that once carried our hearts in unison. I close my eyes, and I can still see her smile, feel the warmth of the fire, smell the salt in her hair. Some people spend a lifetime searching for meaning. I found mine on a forgotten island, in the eyes of a woman who once said, "I'm just a woman, and you're what I want." And in that one fragile, eternal truth, she gave me everything I'll never forget. What would you do if you saw a stranger being humiliated in public? Most people would just stay quiet and look away, but this single dad didn't. He stood up, defended a woman at a coffee shop, not knowing that she was actually a billionaire who would soon change his life forever. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The coffee shop was bustling that morning, filled with the clinking of mugs, the hiss of steaming milk, and the low hum of conversations blending together in a melody of ordinary life. But for David, a 34-year-old single father, every morning carried the same quiet battle. Juggling his job, his young daughter Lily's school routine, and the ever-present weight of being the only parent she had left, and as he stood in line waiting for his usual black coffee, he thought about the daycare bill he had to pay, the worn shoes Lily had outgrown, and the essay she had proudly written about her dad being her hero. A thought that warmed his heart even as it reminded him of how hard he was trying to hold everything together, yet little did he know that on this very morning, fate had prepared a twist that would rewrite his life in ways he could never imagine. Across the shop, near the window where sunlight spilled onto polished wooden tables, a woman in her early 30s with sleek chestnut hair tied in a neat bun sat quietly, dressed in a simple beige coat over a white blouse, elegant yet understated, her eyes scanning a laptop screen with focused intensity. She looked like any other professional grabbing a quick coffee before work, but beneath that calm exterior was Catherine Hayes, a billionaire entrepreneur known in elite circles for her intelligence and power, though here she sat unnoticed, wanting for once to blend into the world of normal people, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe in the scent of roasted beans and enjoy the freedom of anonymity. Yet peace rarely lasts, and soon trouble brewed when a man at the counter, loud and arrogant, began making comments directed at her, his voice sharp enough to cut through the chatter of the cafe. "Hey, sweetheart, why don't you smile? You look too serious for a place like this," he sneered, leaning against the counter as if the world revolved around him. A few customers looked up briefly before returning to their phones, pretending not to notice, but Catherine's lips pressed together in discomfort as she tried to ignore him. However, the man was relentless, stepping closer to her table. "Come on, don't be rude, I'm just trying to have a conversation," he added with mock charm, and that was when David, who had been watching with growing unease, felt something inside him snap. He knew what it was like to feel small, to feel cornered, to wish someone, anyone, would step in, and without a second thought, he left his place in line and walked straight toward the woman, his voice steady yet commanding. "Hey, she's clearly not interested, why don't you back off?" The cafe seemed to hold its breath as the man turned to glare at David, surprised that someone had dared to interfere. "And who are you, her bodyguard?" The stranger scoffed, but David didn't flinch, his tall frame standing protectively beside the woman. "I'm someone who knows when enough is enough, now leave her alone." His tone carried the weight of a man who had faced hardships greater than petty intimidation, the kind that taught you to fight not with fists but with conviction. The bully muttered under his breath and finally stormed out, slamming the door behind him, and just like that, the cafe exhaled as if nothing had happened. "People going back to their drinks and screens, but Catherine was left speechless, her heart pounding not from fear but from astonishment at the stranger who had stood up for her when no one else would. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying both relief and admiration. David simply nodded, offering a small smile. "No one deserves to be treated like that," he replied before turning to head back in line for his coffee. But Catherine, curious and drawn to the man who had just defended her, stopped him. "Wait, at least let me buy you your coffee," she insisted, standing up and closing her laptop. David hesitated, his instinct telling him not to accept charity, yet her eyes held a sincerity that disarmed him. "All right, but only if you let me say thank you properly," she added, her lips curving into a smile that seemed both graceful and warm, and so they ordered together, sitting across from each other at the table by the window where sunlight played on the rim of their cups. "I'm Catherine," she introduced herself, leaving out her last name, her empire, her wealth. She wanted to be seen simply as a woman, not as a billionaire, and David responded with a gentle grin. "David. And that little girl over there with the pigtails and chocolate milk mustache is Lily, my daughter." He gestured to the corner where a bright-eyed 6-year-old sat coloring in her sketchbook, swinging her legs happily, and Catherine's heart softened instantly, the innocence of the child melting any formality in the air. "She's beautiful," Catherine whispered, her eyes lingering on Lily with a tenderness she didn't expect to feel. "She's my world," David said, his voice carrying quiet pride and a hint of exhaustion, and in that moment Catherine saw not just a man but a father who had given up everything for his child, his worn jacket, the calloused hands, the faint shadows under his eyes. Signs of sacrifice wrapped in strength, and though she had built empires and closed billion-dollar deals, she realized she was sitting across from someone richer in spirit than anyone she had ever met. Their conversation flowed naturally, laughter spilling between them like they were old friends catching up, David telling stories about Lily's wild imagination and Catherine sharing light-hearted memories of her childhood, carefully choosing which truths to reveal and which secrets to guard. Yet, beneath her calm demeanor she was studying him, wondering how a man who had so little could carry himself with such dignity, and the more she watched him, the more she felt a stirring inside, something beyond gratitude, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. And as their cups emptied and Lily tugged at David's sleeve to show him her drawing, Catherine's decision was made. She wanted to see this man again, not as a rescuer in a coffee shop, but as someone who might just hold the key to a part of her life she had long ignored, the part that craved real connection. She smiled, reaching for her phone. "David, I'd like to stay in touch, maybe meet again sometime, if you'd like that." Her words hung in the air like an unspoken promise, and though David was taken aback, a spark of hope flickered in his eyes, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself since the day his world had been torn apart by loss. "I'd like that," he replied simply, his voice low but steady, and neither of them knew then that this simple moment, born from courage in a coffee shop, was only the beginning of a story that would test their hearts, bridge two different worlds, and reveal truths that could change everything. But for now, as the morning light bathed the cafe in gentle warmth, it was enough that two strangers had found each other in the most unexpected way, unaware that destiny had just quietly taken its seat at their table, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Days turned into weeks, and Catherine kept meeting David and little Lily, her heart softening with every shared laugh and quiet conversation. Yet a secret weighed heavily, he still didn't know who she truly was. One evening, after walking with them through the park, Catherine finally confessed, her voice trembling, "David, I'm not just Catherine. I own Hayes Enterprises." Silence fell, David's world spinning, but Lily's tiny hand slipped into Catherine's, breaking the tension. David looked into her eyes, torn yet hopeful. Maybe love wasn't about wealth, but about finding someone who truly cared.
The night was supposed to be a cruel joke. That's what Emma realized the moment she walked into the fancy restaurant, her heart beating nervously as she smoothed down the edges of her thrift store dress. She didn't have much, just her quiet job at the bookstore, her rent barely covered, and her quiet prayers at night that life would get better. When her co-workers told her they had set her up on a blind date, she thought maybe, just maybe, something kind was waiting for her. She never knew it was meant to humiliate her. At the corner table, a group of well-dressed women whispered, smirked, and stole glances at her. Emma tried to ignore the sharp sting in her chest and focused on finding her supposed date. Then her eyes landed on him. He was nothing like she expected. Tall, sharp suit, dark hair slightly messy in a way that made him seem approachable yet impossibly refined. His presence pulled all attention in the room, as though he wasn't just a man, he was the sun everyone revolved around. His name was Daniel, though she didn't know it yet. To her, he was just the stranger whose eyes softened when they met hers. He rose from his chair politely, as if she were royalty stepping into the room. Emma's voice wavered when she greeted him, her insecurity whispering that this couldn't be real. Why would someone like him be her date? Surely, this was part of the joke. But instead of mocking her, Daniel smiled, and that smile seemed to disarm the entire evening. As they sat, Emma noticed the hushed laughter from the nearby table where her co-workers sat, their phones angled, recording everything. Daniel leaned closer, speaking in a low voice, "Do you know them?" Emma hesitated, her throat tight, then confessed quietly, "They set me up, as a joke." She braced herself for him to laugh too, for his charm to shatter into cruelty. But his jaw tightened, his expression darkening as his gaze flicked toward the whispering group. "That's not funny," he said, his tone cold enough to silence them from across the room. Dinner unfolded differently than Emma expected. Instead of a disaster, it felt like something out of a dream. Daniel asked about her passions, listened when she talked about her love of books, and told her about raising his 6-year-old daughter alone. He didn't flaunt his wealth, though she noticed the subtle signs, the way the staff greeted him with respect, the car keys he placed on the table, the tailored suit that fit him perfectly. He wasn't just some man on a blind date. He was powerful, grounded, and yet vulnerable when he spoke about his daughter's late mother. For the first time in years, Emma felt seen, truly seen. The women at the corner, however, didn't give up. One of them finally approached, smirking. "Daniel, you don't need to pity her. We just thought it would be funny," but before she could finish, Daniel stood, his height towering, his voice carrying through the restaurant. "Funny? To tear down someone as genuine as her? To make her the center of your cruelty?" His words froze the room. The laughter died instantly. Emma's cheeks burned with humiliation, but before she could escape, Daniel did something no one expected. He knelt down right there, in front of her stunned co-workers, and took Emma's trembling hand in his. The restaurant held its breath. Emma's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. "What are you?" But Daniel's gaze never wavered. "Emma, I know this is sudden. But I can't stand by while they laugh at you. I don't want this moment to define you as a joke. I want to rewrite it into something unforgettable. You're the most real woman I've met in years, and I want the world to know it. So, will you give me the honor of being by my side, not just tonight, but for a lifetime?" Gasps echoed around them. The co-workers' smug grins dissolved into pale silence. Emma's heart thundered, her mind spinning. A proposal? Tonight? To her? The girl who came in wearing second-hand clothes and trembling nerves? She could barely breathe, but her soul whispered that this wasn't pity. It was something deeper. Something that shook even Daniel as he looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered in his world. Emma's hands trembled as tears welled in her eyes. She glanced at the cruel faces of her co-workers, then back at Daniel's sincerity. I don't understand," she whispered. Daniel smiled gently. "You don't need to understand tonight. Just trust me. Let me be the man who stands up for you when others try to tear you down. My daughter needs a role model. And I think I've found someone strong enough to change both our lives." Whispers erupted around them, phones recording, cameras flashing. Emma's co-workers, once smug, were now humiliated, caught in the act of cruelty that had backfired spectacularly. Some tried to laugh it off, others hid their faces, but the damage was done. Daniel wasn't just a man, he was a CEO, a single father known in the city for his empire, and now, everyone knew where his heart was pointing. Straight at Emma. Emma's voice cracked as she finally answered, Yes. Yes, I'll take the chance." The restaurant erupted in applause, though Emma barely heard it. Daniel rose, pulling her into his arms, shielding her trembling body from the world. For the first time, Emma wasn't invisible. She wasn't a joke. She was chosen, and chosen boldly, in front of everyone. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with clips of Daniel kneeling, of Emma's stunned expression, of the co-workers' horror. Headlines called it the most unexpected proposal of the year. But for Emma, none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Daniel called her every morning just to hear her voice, the way his daughter ran into her arms with innocent trust, and the way he looked at her when no cameras were around, with devotion, not pity. Her co-workers avoided her after that, embarrassed that their cruel trick had made her the center of something extraordinary. But Emma didn't need their apologies. She had found something much greater. Love that saw past appearances, dignity restored, and a future she never thought possible. One evening, weeks later, Emma stood in Daniel's penthouse, the city lights glittering like stars behind them. His daughter was asleep in her room, and Daniel poured Emma a glass of wine. He touched her hand, his voice soft but firm. "I meant every word that night. I didn't propose to save you. I proposed because, from the moment I saw you, I knew my life had been missing someone like you." Emma smiled through tears, finally believing him. The cruel joke that was supposed to break her had instead given her the greatest gift. And as Daniel kissed her forehead and whispered promises of a forever they would build together, Emma realized that life had its way of turning pain into miracles. And dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes love finds us in the most unexpected places, even in moments meant to break us. Never stop believing in your worth, because the right person will see it, even when the world doesn't. And if you want to hear more heart-touching stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because the next story we share might just change the way you see love forever. Rain poured relentlessly against the windshield as Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter, his tired eyes struggling to see through the fogged glass. It was past midnight, and he was on his way home from another exhausting double shift at the diner, a routine that had become his life ever since his wife passed 2 years ago. He didn't have time for surprises anymore, let alone the kind that would change his life forever. But that night, he would find a small, trembling figure on the side of the road, soaked to the bone, lost, and whispering words that would shake the world he thought he knew. That was the night Daniel found Emily. At first, he thought she was a trick of the rain, a shadow cast by his headlights. But when he pulled over and stepped out, his flashlight revealed a girl no older than 7, barefoot and shivering, clutching a tiny stuffed bear. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn, her eyes wide with fear. Hey, it's okay," Daniel said gently, crouching down. "Where are your parents?" She shook her head, unable to speak. Tears mingled with rain as she whispered, "I don't know. I can't find Mommy." Something inside Daniel, the same fatherly instinct that had kept him alive for his own son, Charlie, broke open. He wrapped his coat around the little girl and carried her to the truck. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but he knew one thing. He couldn't leave her there. By the time they reached his small, worn-down house on the edge of town, the storm had turned into a gentle drizzle. Charlie, who was 9 and waiting up despite Daniel's instructions, stared in surprise. "Dad, who's that?" "This is Emily," Daniel said softly. "She's lost." That night, Daniel tucked Emily into Charlie's bed while Charlie insisted on sleeping on the couch. As he turned off the lamp, he saw Emily gripping the stuffed bear tightly, whispering something under her breath, a name, maybe. He couldn't quite hear it, but it sounded like Lila. The next morning, Daniel called the police, reported the missing child, and waited. But days passed with no news. No one came forward. And in that time, Emily began to thaw slowly, cautiously, like a frost-bitten flower touched by sunlight. Daniel learned she loved pancakes but hated syrup. She hummed softly when she drew pictures. And every time Charlie made her laugh, Daniel felt something stir in him that he hadn't felt in years, a quiet joy, the feeling of family healing itself. But there were shadows too. Some nights, Emily woke up screaming, crying for her mother. And sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she'd trace her fingers over a small silver bracelet on her wrist engraved with the name, E. Harrington. Daniel didn't think much of it until one evening, as he was closing up the diner, a breaking news alert flashed across the TV mounted in the corner. A headline appeared. Billionaire heiress Lila Harrington issues heartfelt plea for missing daughter, reward set at $2 million. Daniel froze. On the screen was a picture of Lila Harrington, her elegant face pale with grief, and beside her, in a family photo, was Emily. He nearly dropped the coffee pot. His heart raced. Emily wasn't just lost, she was the missing daughter of one of the wealthiest women in the country. He went home that night with 1,000 thoughts tearing through his mind. When he walked in, Emily and Charlie were laughing over a board game, their laughter bright and full of life. Daniel stood there silently, torn between what was right and what his heart was whispering, that Emily felt like home. The next morning, he made the call. Within hours, black SUVs rolled into his dusty driveway, and Lila Harrington herself stepped out. She looked nothing like the woman on TV, her eyes were red from sleepless nights, her voice trembled as she spoke. "Where is she?" Daniel led her inside. Emily stood frozen, the stuffed bear in her arms. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. "Mommy?" Emily whispered. Lila fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she held her daughter close. "Oh my baby, my sweet girl." It should have been the perfect ending, mother and daughter reunited, a father figure stepping aside. But as Lila turned to Daniel, her expression shifted from gratitude to something unreadable. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly. They sat in the kitchen, where Daniel's coffee pot hissed softly between them. Lila's hands shook as she took out a folder from her purse. "I owe you the truth, Daniel. Because this isn't what it seems." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. "Emily isn't biologically mine. She's my late sister's child. My sister died when Emily was a baby. I adopted her, raised her as my own. But before she passed, she told me something I didn't understand, something I thought was just delirium. She said Emily's father was still alive, that he was out there somewhere, struggling, trying to do his best after losing everything." Daniel's chest tightened. Lila's voice cracked. "Daniel, my sister's name was Anna. Anna Reynolds." The coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered. That name, Anna, his wife's name. The woman he'd loved and lost. He stared at Lila, disbelief spreading through him. "That's not possible," he whispered. "My wife, she died giving birth to Charlie." Lila's tears fell freely now. She didn't just have one child, Daniel. She had twins. The room spun. His mind reeled back to that night 9 years ago, the panic, the chaos, the nurse's somber face saying, "We couldn't save the baby." But what if they were wrong? What if Emily was his daughter, his blood, all along? The truth shattered him and rebuilt him all at once. He looked through the doorway at Emily, laughing with Charlie, the two of them so alike it hurt to look at them. He realized now why she'd felt so familiar, why her smile mirrored his son's, why his heart had known before his mind did. Lila reached across the table, her voice trembling. "I didn't know, Daniel. I swear I didn't. I only wanted to keep her safe. But you deserve to know the truth." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy with years of pain, loss, and unexpected grace. In the weeks that followed, lawyers and guardians got involved, but this time, Daniel fought not out of anger, but out of love. He didn't want to take Emily away from the woman who'd raised her with kindness, but he couldn't lose her again either. In the end, a new kind of family emerged, one bound not by wealth or blood alone, but by forgiveness. Emily spent half her time at the mansion with Lila and half in the small house with Daniel and Charlie. And every time Daniel saw his two children playing together, he felt the ache of the past slowly fade into something beautiful. He had lost everything once. But fate, in its strange, merciful way, had given him everything back, not as it was, but as it was meant to be. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the rain fell softly on the roof, Daniel would look at Emily sleeping peacefully beside her brother and whisper, "Welcome home, baby girl." Because sometimes, the families we lose find their way back, not by chance, but by destiny. And sometimes, even the darkest storms can lead us right where we belong. It started with a man sitting alone on a cold metal bench at gate 42, his little daughter curled up beside him under a thin blanket. The hum of the airport filled the silence, the sound of rolling suitcases, distant announcements, and the faint tapping of rain against the windows. He wasn't supposed to be there that night. No one ever plans to sleep in an airport. But life, with its unpredictable cruelty and hidden grace, had other plans. What he didn't know was that the woman sitting 2 seats away, dressed in a crisp suit, her eyes tired yet curious, was about to change everything. Ethan Miller was a single dad of 3 years, and life hadn't been kind. He worked double shifts as a mechanic, barely earning enough to pay rent and care for his 6-year-old daughter, Lucy. That night, he had been on his way to attend his brother's wedding across the country, a trip Lucy had been excited about for weeks. But a cancelled flight, an overbooked hotel, and an empty wallet left them stranded overnight in the terminal. He tried to keep Lucy entertained, telling her stories, letting her play with his old phone, but exhaustion crept in. Her head soon rested on his lap as he gently brushed her hair from her face. Across from him sat a woman, Emma Carlisle, CEO of a major design company, dressed in tailored perfection, carrying herself with the quiet strength of someone who'd learned how to hide pain behind poise. She was traveling for work, heading home after months of negotiations abroad. To anyone watching, she looked like she had everything: power, money, respect. But beneath the polished exterior was a loneliness she could never admit. Her life was all boardrooms and deadlines, no family waiting at home, no one to share the quiet moments with. She noticed him first, the way he tucked the blanket around his daughter's shoulders, the way his eyes lingered on her face as if she were his whole world. Something about that scene tugged at her chest. She didn't know why, but she couldn't look away. As the night stretched on, the airport grew quieter, the world outside drowned in rain. Lucy stirred in her sleep, shivering slightly. Emma, without thinking, walked over. "Here," she said softly, holding out her travel blanket. "She looks cold." Ethan blinked up, surprised. "Oh, I couldn't, thank you, but we're fine." "Please," she insisted. "I've got another one in my bag." He hesitated, then smiled gratefully. "Thank you. That's very kind." They talked for a while, small talk at first. About travel, delayed flights, the terrible coffee in airport vending machines. But soon, the conversation deepened. She learned he'd been raising Lucy alone since his wife passed away 2 years earlier. He learned she had built her company from scratch after losing her father, the only person who had ever believed in her dream. The night turned softer, the rain quieter, and for the first time in a long time, both of them felt seen. When morning came, their flights were finally rebooked. Ethan's plane was leaving from another gate, and as he packed Lucy's things, Emma felt something ache inside her chest. She didn't even know his last name. "It was nice meeting you, Ethan," she said with a smile that hid her reluctance. "You're doing an amazing job with her." He chuckled softly, brushing hair from Lucy's eyes. "Trying my best. Thank you, really, for the blanket, for the company." They said goodbye, each walking away with a quiet sense of loss they couldn't quite explain. But fate, as it often does, wasn't finished with them yet. 2 weeks later, Ethan received an unexpected email. It was from a company in the city offering him an interview for a mechanic's position with benefits, higher pay, and childcare support. Confused but desperate, he accepted. When he arrived, dressed in his best clothes and holding Lucy's hand, he froze at the sight that greeted him: Emma Carlisle standing at the reception desk. Their eyes met, both stunned. "You," he breathed. Emma smiled gently. "Me. I run this company. I didn't tell you that night." He stood speechless. Why did you offer me the interview?" "Because good people deserve a chance," she said simply. "And I think you deserve more than life has given you." From that moment, everything began to change. Ethan got the job. He worked hard, rising quickly, earning respect for his skill and kindness. Lucy adored the office staff, especially Emma, who always had time to talk with her. Over months, their bond grew not just between a boss and an employee, but between two hearts that had known loss and found healing in each other. But love isn't always easy. Gossip started. Rumors spread. People whispered about favoritism, about Ethan's sudden promotions. He tried to distance himself, but Emma wouldn't let go. Let them talk, she told him one evening after hours, her voice trembling. They don't know what we've been through. They don't know us. Still, Ethan hesitated. He was afraid of losing his job, of jeopardizing Lucy's stability. He didn't think he was enough for someone like her, a woman who could buy anything she wanted. But she didn't want wealth or power. She wanted the warmth of a family, the laughter of a child, the simple love that he carried so naturally. One evening, as the sun set through the office windows, Lucy ran into the room holding a drawing she'd made. It showed three stick figures holding hands, her dad, and Emma. Look, she said brightly. It's us. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Emma knelt down beside Lucy, her voice breaking. It's beautiful, sweetheart. That was the moment Ethan realized love wasn't about what he could offer, but what they could build together. Months later, they returned to that same airport where it all began. Only this time, they weren't stranded. They were heading on vacation together, as a family. As they walked past gate 42, Ethan smiled and whispered, "Funny how life works, huh?" Emma squeezed his hand. Sometimes the best journeys start where you least expect. The story of a single dad who slept in an airport and the CEO who sat beside him wasn't about luck or coincidence. It was about two broken souls finding each other in the unlikeliest place. It was about hope that lingers, even in the darkest hours. And for anyone watching their story unfold, it was a reminder, sometimes, life's delays aren't setbacks, they're redirections. You just have to stay long enough to see where they lead. He stood quietly at the corner of the decorated hall, his hands awkwardly tucked in the pockets of his worn-out blazer, one that didn't quite fit him anymore. The music, the laughter, the glittering chandeliers, it all felt like a world he didn't belong to. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was just a guest. A friend's plus one. But that night, something happened, something that would change his life forever. Because before the night ended, the bride, yes, the bride herself, walked up to him, took his trembling hand, and whispered, "Dance with me, before you notice why." People often say life changes in an instant, and for Daniel Hayes, a single father and mechanic from a small town, that instant began the moment he stepped into that wedding. He wasn't rich, he wasn't handsome in the magazine way, and he definitely didn't belong among the glittering guests who clinked champagne glasses and spoke of promotions and vacations. He was there only because his best friend Mark, the groom's cousin, had begged him to come along. "You need to get out, man," Mark had said. "It's been years since you smiled." And maybe Mark was right. Ever since his wife passed away 5 years ago, Daniel's life had been an endless cycle of work, bills, and bedtime stories for his 6-year-old daughter, Lily. She was his entire world. Everything else, his dreams, his laughter, his heart, had faded with time. When Daniel first walked into the ballroom, he felt invisible. No one looked at him twice, except for a few curious glances at his old shoes. He stood by the buffet table, sipping water, trying not to look too out of place. Then his eyes caught her, the bride. Emma Wallace. Stunning in her white gown, but what struck Daniel wasn't her beauty. It was her eyes. There was something deeply sad behind her perfect smile, something no one else seemed to notice. She laughed for the crowd, smiled for the cameras, but Daniel saw what others couldn't, a quiet ache hiding behind all that sparkle. He shouldn't have cared. It wasn't his business. But something about her sadness tugged at something inside him, something he thought had long died. Every time she looked his way, Daniel felt her gaze linger a second too long. Once, twice, then again. He thought he imagined it, until the music changed. The band began to play a slow, haunting tune, one that made everyone drift to the dance floor. Daniel turned to leave quietly, not wanting to stay longer than necessary. But before he could take another step, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Then, a voice, calm, trembling, and strangely familiar, said, "You're not going to leave, are you?" He turned, startled. It was Emma. Her veil had been lifted, her eyes glimmering under the soft light. Before he could speak, she extended her hand, her diamond ring catching the glow. "Dance with me," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. I can't," Daniel stammered. I know who I am," she cut in softly. "Just dance with me. Please." before you notice why. And somehow, he did. Her hand fit perfectly into his. The world around them seemed to vanish, no guests, no music, no judgment. Just two souls, broken in different ways, finding a strange rhythm together. Daniel didn't understand why his chest felt so heavy, why his heart beat faster than it had in years. All he knew was that she held onto him as if she was holding onto something she didn't want to lose. When the song ended, she smiled sadly and whispered, "Thank you." Then she walked away. And an hour later, chaos erupted, the bride was gone. Vanished. The groom shouted, the family panicked, and police were called. But Daniel couldn't stop replaying her words in his head, before you notice why. That night, when he finally returned home to his small apartment, he found a folded note slipped into his jacket pocket. It was written in elegant, shaky handwriting. "I saw your daughter's photo in your wallet when we danced. She has your smile. I wish my child had a father like you. I can't stay in a marriage that's built on lies. Thank you for reminding me what real kindness feels like. Emma." Days turned into weeks, and Daniel thought he'd never see her again. Until one rainy afternoon, a soft knock echoed on his door. When he opened it, there she was, drenched, trembling, holding a small suitcase. Behind her stood a little girl, no older than Lily, clutching her hand. "I didn't know where else to go," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "You once danced with me when everyone else turned away. I need someone to remind me how to live again." Daniel didn't speak. He just stepped aside and let her in. That moment became the quiet beginning of something neither of them had expected. Two broken hearts slowly learning to heal through morning coffee, children's laughter, shared pain, and late-night talks. Emma's world of luxury had vanished, Daniel's world of loneliness began to fade. Together, they rebuilt something stronger than either had known, a home. Months later, under the same song that once bound them, Emma asked him to dance again. "Remember when I said, before you notice why," she said, smiling through tears. "Now I know why. Because I was meant to notice you." Daniel smiled, pulling her close. "And I was meant to find you." As the music played, their daughters giggled nearby, and two souls that had once lost everything found everything they needed in each other's arms. And for the first time in years, Daniel realized, sometimes you're not invited to love, sometimes, love finds its own way to invite you.
Rain tapped against the window pane as Emma sat at her kitchen table, holding a glossy white wedding invitation in her trembling hands. The gold letters shone mockingly under the light, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Daniel Carter and Vanessa Hayes." Daniel. Her ex-fiancé. The man she thought would be her forever. She had loved him with every fiber of her being, only to have him leave her suddenly for Vanessa, a woman he claimed made him feel alive again. Emma hadn't thought she would be invited, yet here it was, a cruel reminder that not only had Daniel moved on, but he wanted her to see it. To sit among smiling guests while he married someone else. Her stomach knotted. She thought of ignoring it, but she knew the whispers would follow her. She also knew Daniel's circle, his friends, his family, they would expect her to attend, if only to prove she was fine. But she wasn't fine. She hadn't been fine since the day Daniel left. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her storm of thoughts. It was her neighbor, Luke. Luke was a single dad raising his little girl, Lily, all on his own. He had moved into the apartment next door a year ago, and in that time, Emma had come to see him as a quiet, steady presence. He was kind, hardworking, and dedicated to his daughter. He was also the opposite of Daniel in every way, no games, no pretenses, just a man doing his best. "You okay?" Luke's voice came through the line, warm and deep. Emma hesitated, then blurted, "I just got invited to my ex's wedding." There was silence for a moment. Then Luke said, almost casually, "So, do you have someone to go with?" Emma laughed bitterly. "No. Do you think I'd bring a date just to sit there and watch my ex get married?" But Luke didn't laugh. His voice softened. "Then take me." Emma froze. "What?" "I'll go with you," Luke said simply. "As your date. No one has to know the details." Let them see you're not alone. Let them see you're stronger than they think. Her heart pounded. Part of her wanted to refuse, to protect him from the spectacle, but another part felt something stir. Hope. Emma agreed, though doubt gnawed at her. Could she really face Daniel again? Could she walk into that wedding without breaking? The day arrived. Emma slipped into a deep navy gown that hugged her curves, her hair falling in soft waves. She barely recognized the reflection staring back at her. For the first time in months, she looked alive. Luke arrived in a crisp black suit, Lily waving from behind him. "You look beautiful," he said sincerely, and something in Emma's chest shifted. Together, they drove to the grand estate where the wedding was being held. The hall buzzed with music and laughter, chandeliers sparkling overhead. Emma's heart nearly gave out when she spotted Daniel at the altar, handsome as ever in his tailored suit, Vanessa radiant by his side. But then she felt Luke's steady hand slip into hers. "Breathe," he whispered. "I've got you." Throughout the ceremony, Luke never let go. When whispers floated through the crowd about Emma's presence, Luke met them with a proud smile, as if daring anyone to pity her. When Daniel's eyes flickered toward her, surprise flashing across his face, Emma lifted her chin higher, her fingers tightening around Luke's. By the time the vows ended and the applause rang through the hall, Emma realized something startling: she hadn't cried. She had braced herself for pain, for heartbreak, but instead, she felt stronger. And when Luke leaned down and murmured, "Proud of you," she felt something else too. Something dangerous. Something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The reception was in full swing. Guests danced under golden lights, champagne flowed freely, and laughter filled the air. Emma sat at the table beside Luke, her nerves finally loosening. Daniel and Vanessa floated around the room, greeting their guests. But when Daniel reached Emma's table, his eyes locked on Luke. "Emma," Daniel said smoothly, though his jaw tightened. "I didn't expect you to come." "And with company." Luke rose, extending his hand. "Luke Harrison." Emma's date. The grip between the two men lingered longer than necessary, tension crackling in the air. Daniel forced a smile before turning back to Emma. "Well, I'm glad you came. Truly. I hope you've moved on." "I have," Emma said, her voice firm. She didn't look at Daniel, though. She looked at Luke. Hours passed. The music grew louder, the crowd rowdier. Emma excused herself to the terrace for some fresh air, her heart still racing from the confrontation. Moments later, Luke joined her. "You okay?" She nodded, staring out at the twinkling lights of the city below. "I never thought I'd survive seeing him again. But I did. Because of you." Luke stepped closer, his voice low. "You didn't just survive. You showed him he doesn't own you anymore." Something in Emma's chest cracked open. She turned to him, eyes shining. "Why did you come with me, Luke?" "Really?" Luke hesitated, then sighed. "Because I know what it feels like to be left behind. My wife, she walked out on me and Lily 2 years ago. Said family life was too much for her. I've been trying to hold it together ever since. And when you told me about the wedding, I couldn't stand the thought of you facing that pain alone. You deserve someone to stand by you." Emma's throat tightened. She had always admired Luke's strength, but hearing his story now, she realized he wasn't just strong, he was broken too. Broken, but still fighting. Her eyes blurred with tears as she whispered, "You've given me more than Daniel ever did. You've given me respect. Safety. Hope." Luke's hand brushed her cheek, lingering just long enough to make her heart race. But before either of them could say more, a voice cut through the night. It was Daniel. "Emma," he said, stepping onto the terrace, his expression unreadable. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you before." Emma froze, her tears drying instantly. Luke's hand slipped protectively around her waist. Daniel's eyes flickered between them, then landed on her. "I made a mistake. I thought Vanessa was what I wanted, but seeing you tonight, seeing you with him, he swallowed hard. I realize I never stopped loving you. The words hit her like a blow, but instead of the longing she once thought she'd feel, Emma only felt anger. She stepped forward, her voice steady. You don't get to say that. You don't get to walk out of my life, marry someone else, and then come back as if I'd been waiting. You don't own me, Daniel. Not anymore. Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she turned and took Luke's hand. I may not know what tomorrow looks like, but I know this, standing here with Luke feels more real than anything I ever had with you. Daniel's face paled, his mouth opening, but no words came. Emma didn't wait for them. She walked away, her heart pounding, Luke at her side. Later that night, when Luke dropped her home, Emma lingered at the door. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For being there. For seeing me. Luke smiled softly. Always. And for the first time in years, Emma closed her door not with emptiness, but with hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing, she had survived the hardest moment of her life, and she wasn't alone anymore. As she crawled into bed, tears slipped down her cheeks, but they weren't from heartbreak this time. They were from relief. From gratitude. From the terrifying, beautiful realization that her story wasn't over. It was just beginning.